So let's just review what we started our study of the Rashba. And you may recall that we found a contradiction in the Rashba between what he wrote in the Chuvas in response to a question of a Shoel, as opposed to what he wrote in his Chidushim on Masechta Shabbos Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis in the sugya of what comes first, Ner Chanukah or Yayin L'Kiddush. In the case of the Chuvas, the Rashba clearly indicates that the mitzvah of Zachas Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho on a Torah level does not require Yayin, does not require Makom Suda, but rather each person expresses himself words of praise for the Shabbos in his own manner of expression. Kol echad v'echad lefi tzachus l'shono. And yet the Rashba in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Chav Gimel says that if the issue were that he doesn't have neither yayin nor pas for Kiddush, then for sure he would not use his limited funds to buy Ner Chanukah, but rather he would use his limited funds to buy yayin for Kiddush, clearly indicating that yayin is doraisa. So at the face of it, there seems to be a head-on collision between what the Rashba wrote in response to the Shoel, we'll explain the question of the Shoel, as opposed to what he wrote in the Chidushim. Now, one could always argue that, okay, the Rashba changed his mind, whatever it might be. But we're going to try to see if we can reconcile this apparent contradiction. Now, in order to introduce a possible reconciliation, we want to suggest an answer to the following, I call it a methodological question. And that is, when we differentiate between lechatchila and b'di'eved, does that only apply to the Rabbanans, or does it apply even to a Doraisa? Meaning, can the Torah itself envision a lechatchila and a b'di'eved? Lechatchila is the ideal way to perform a mitzvah, and b'di'eved is the way that you could be yotzei in a sort of fallback position, but it's not ideal, but nevertheless you fulfill your obligation. So the truth of the matter is that this is a subject of Tosfos in Masechta Yevamos, in a parak that's called Mitzvahs Chalitza, and Tosfos points out that L'chatchila, the Torah requires performing Chalitza in a certain way. For example, she has to read the Parsha before the Chalitza is performed. But b'di'eved, the mitzvah of Chalitza could be achieved even without her Kriya. So we see clearly that the Torah differentiates between a lechatchila and a b'di'eved. We see something similar in the second parak of Brachos with regard to Kriyat Shema, that lechatchila one should recite Kriyat Shema out loud, but according to at least one Tana, if he was maharher belibo, he was yotzei Kriyat Shema, even without dibur peh. And that's going to be a machlok between Rebbe and Chachamim over there in the second parak. But the fundamental possibility of the Torah requiring something as ideal and relying b'di'eved on something that's less than ideal, but nevertheless fulfills the mitzvah, that does exist in the halachic universe, if we could call it that. You might find similar concepts in Hafrashas Trumas Umaisros, where, lechatchila you should be mafresh what's called min mukaf, meaning I don't mafresh here on something that's there, far away, but b'diavad it could be the Hafrashas Chal. And those are all Doraisa halachas. Okay, so that was a sort of a parathenical insert as an introduction to what I want to suggest is the Shitas HaRashba in Kiddush. The Rashba in Chuvis was addressing the Shoel. Let me present to you the problem that the Shoel, it's obvious in my mind that the Shoel, we don't know his name, was quite a Talmud Chacham. We're not talking about a stupid person. We're talking about, a scholar of sorts, because he quotes a number of different sugyas in Shas. And he points out that in the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Lamed Gimel, the Gemara lists mitzvos that were established by the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, and amongst them is Kiddush. And the clear implication is that Kiddush is D'Rabbanan. It was an institution that was created by the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah. But yet, the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Chaf, if we just turn back 13 pages, says explicitly that Kiddush is Minat Torah. So the Shoel says, I see here a head-on collision. So the Rashba in the Chuvas answers the Shoel by saying the following, that Kiddush is Doraisa. That's explicit in the Sugya on Daf Chav. What the Chachamim instituted was the Matbeya Shel Kiddush, that one should recite Kiddush in the following objective way, with a bracha, Shem Umalchus, and the Chasima, Baruch Atah Hashem, Kadosh HaShabbos. That's what the Gemara had in mind when it says that the Chazal, the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, established Kiddush. They established the Matbeya of Kiddush, the Nusach of Kiddush. But the entity of Kiddush, that's clearly Doraisa. Has nothing to do with the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah. The Torah says, Zochus Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho. Now, what I'm trying to suggest is that when the Rashba in Tshuva says that you could be Yotzei Kiddush simply by expressing your praise for the Shabbos, he's addressing that which is absolutely indispensable, the barest requirement. He's not addressing the question of how to embellish the mitzvah, how to implement Kiddush and fulfill it on an ideal level, l'chatchila. That's not his business. He's only trying to answer the question of the Shoel to establish that Kiddush itself as an entity is Doraisa. He's not going through, all the nitty-gritty details about, how to do the mitzvah of Kiddush, how to implement the mitzvah of Kiddush l'chatchila, how to perform the mitzvah of Kiddush in an ideal way as opposed to that which is likuva. That's not on the table. That's not what he's addressing. The Rashba in his Chidushim, when he's dealing with the question of limited funds and whether you direct them towards Shemen L'Ner Chanukah or Yayin L'Kiddush, there the Rashba wants to address the ideal requirement min Torah. What does the Torah require? Like, for example, in Kriyat Shema, the Torah requires that you enunciate verbally Shema Yisrael, etc. In the case of Chalitza, the Torah requires reading the Parsha. And we could go on and on and on. So the Rashba is saying now that what the Torah requires in an ideal way is to recite Kiddush al Yayin. If, on the other hand, you omit Yayin and you recite Kiddush without Yayin, then the Rashba in Chuvas has already established that you're Yotzi, you fulfill the basic mitzvah. So then it comes out, according to the Shittas of Rashba, there are really three different halachas here, three different, let's say, principles in how to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. Number one, the ideal mitzvah, the way the Torah envisions it, and this is what we're obligated to do, is to recite Kiddush ala kos, on yain. Then we drop down one level, and we have what we call the b'di'eved, what you might call the nitty-gritty, indispensable part of Kiddush, and that is to recite Kiddush even without yain. Then you have a third level. Let's say you were Makayim the mitzvah of Kiddush Doraisa b'di'eved, without yayin. Now you have a choice. Let's say you could go ahead and bypass and recite Kiddush on bread, or you could buy yayin and recite Kiddush al yayin. So clearly, in this case, the Rabbanan say, well, you know what? On a Doraisa level, you could have recited Kiddush al pas, and that would be sufficient. Meaning you would fulfill the ideal mitzvah. But the Rabbanan made a takana that they want you to fulfill the ideal mitzvah of Kiddush on Yayin, and if you have a choice between Yayin and Pas, they require Yayin. The suffix of the Gemara, it happens to be Rava, in Shabbos Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis, about whether to spend your money on Shemen L'Ner Chanukah or on Yayin L'Kiddush. The Gemara is addressing a case where he has Pas, so he could fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush ala Pas, but he'd be forfeiting the mitzvah min muvchar of choosing yayin over Pas. And here's where the Gemara says, let him buy Shemen L'Ner Chanukah because Persume Nisa is more important than the mitzvah min muvchar, that extra couple of inches that you get by making a Kiddush on wine as opposed to Pas. Now, if we assume the way we suggested it, that according to the Rashba, the ideal method of reciting Kiddush is al kos yayin, and that's really what the Torah would want, then the strange thing is that the Gemara in Pesachim tells us that Rav used to make Kiddush al pas. Why would Rav forfeit a mitzvah min muvchar of yayin? But the Gemara adds a clause, and it says chaviva le pas. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think certainly we could offer this possibility. He was very, very hungry, and I'm not sure about you, but I personally, I don't like to drink wine on an empty stomach, if you know what I mean. This past year we had Asar B'Tevis on Friday, am I right? So imagine you're coming to the Shabbos table, you're famished. You've been fasting for for the last 12 hours. In this case, you'd rather make Kiddush al Pas and immediately satiate your hunger rather than have, wine go right through your system down your esophagus to the empty belly. But whatever it is, Rav sometimes was in the mood for Pas and he made Kiddush al Pas. So it would seem that Chavivole, because he wanted to make Kiddush al Pas, that somehow outdistances the extra mitzvah min muvchar of yayin. It's when you put it all on the scale and you're weighing the mitzvah min muvchar of yayin versus the Chavivole Pas, then Chavivole Pas tips the scale. And therefore Rav is going to make Kiddush on Pas. So I'm not sure if Chavivale Pas is halacha in Kiddush or it's halacha in what we call Chavivas HaMitzvos. In general, in other words, in general, we want to enjoy and cherish the mitzvah, so we want to do it in a way that will get the most pleasure out of the mitzvah. That's called Chavivas HaMitzvah, which has nothing to do specifically with Kiddush. So Rav wanted to give Chavivas to the mitzvah, in this case it happens to be Kiddush, and therefore he preferred to make Kiddush al Pas as opposed to Yain. It could be that it's more than just the general halacha of Chavivas. Maybe it's halacha in Kiddush. Now, the Torah wants you to recite Kiddush on the Suda and connect the Kiddush to the Suda, so maybe the Suda should be enhanced, and therefore the Kiddush is enhanced. I don't know. Okay. But having said all that, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Maybe it's even more than that. It's not a question of chavivas mitzvah. It's a question of, if, as you're saying, it would have given them indigestion or something like that. It's not. It's the other one.
I mean, what,
Maybe.
he might get sick if he drinks the
Yeah.
wine?
So it's not that it's not necessarily chavivas. He would be. It would be the mitzvah would be a pain for him. So you know what I'm saying. So it's not.
Right.
It's even
But
on
again, from that perspective, I think we're saying it's a general halacha in mitzvahs. I'm just suggesting another possibility that might be a Kiddush halacha, because Kiddush is meant to be the kickoff of the Suda. If you imagine a head with a body, so the head of the body of Kiddush is Kiddush. Kiddush is the head and the Suda is the body. And it could be that because of Chavivus, the entity of Suda is enhanced, and hence the mitzvah of Kiddush is enhanced.
understood. But what I'm saying is that you can't, you're not even getting to that point. We're before that point. We're at the point that if the mitzvah is not going to be, he's not going to enjoy the mitzvah at all. Not that it's chavivus, that it's more of an enjoyment. If the mitzvah itself is going to be not that at all, so that would that not just take it, make
I don't
him.
know. Again, the Gemara's language is chavivole. It sounds like he. Okay. But I want to get to the main point of my discussion with you today. And once again, we get to a methodological question. What I mean when I use the term methodological question, that's clear. What I mean is an issue that could have repercussions way beyond the bounds of Kiddush. So here's the issue for today. Is Bobby with us here? I don't know. I see a big B there. I don't know. let me present two sides of a coin, what we call in the yeshiva world a chakira. First, I'll present one possibility, which I think is intuitive, and then a second possibility, which is more of a Kiddush. The issue is as follows. I'm just thinking, Rabbosai, I'm very uncomfortable. I'm going to try an experiment here. I hope I don't lose you. I'm just going to try to move this computer. Let's see if I can do this over to here. Oh boy. That's a world of a difference for me. Mamish, a world of a difference. Okay. Introduction number one. We're talking about mitzvos aseh. Introduction number two. The Torah requires X. Introduction number three. The Rabbanan established that X is not sufficient. We need X plus Y. Introduction number four. He went ahead and he performed the mitzvah A, the way the Torah had prescribed it, but not B, not the way the Rabbanan wanted him to perform that mitzvah. What's the halach in this case? Possibility number one, which I think is intuitive, that the Rabbanan say you did not fulfill the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. The Torah is very happy with the way you did the mitzvah, and the Torah is satisfied. You have a kiyum d'oraisa, but you forfeit a kiyum mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Possibility number two, no. The Rabbanan are going to say that the mitzvah has changed. We instituted Y in addition to the X that the Torah required. And now if you don't fulfill Y, then we're going to undermine and negate your mitzvah so that even min ha-Torah, you're not yotze. Now the first approach is intuitive. The Rabbanan don't have an authority to undermine a mitzvah that you fulfilled on a Doraisa level. They can say, well, you did not fulfill the requirements of the mitzvah as the Rabbanan envisioned it, but Chach, at least, I'll call upon him, let's give him the credit for the mitzvah Doraisa, because the exact Maisa mitzvah that he implemented would be recognized by the Torah. What's the second possibility? The second possibility says that the Rabbanan have the authority to undermine and negate the mitzvah on a doraisa level. Now, I'm going to give a mashal l'mad dover dome. It's not exactly, but I have another Gemara in my back pocket. And the Gemara says that if Shabbos falls on the first day of Sukkot, well, let me say it a little differently. If the first day of Sukkot overlaps with Shabbos, the Rabbanan said no lulav. The Torah says take a lulav. But yesh koch biad chachamim lakor dover min Torah. The Rabbanan have the authority to remove a mitzvah which the Torah obligates you. On this day of Bayom Rishon, first day of Sukkot, I am obligated on the Torah level to take the lulav. The Rabbanan said, don't take the lulav. In effect, the Rabbanan are negating a mitzvah d'oraisa. Now, that's not exactly similar to what I was talking about. I'm talking about a case where the Rabbanan changed the mitzvah min Torah. And they added a limitation to the way the Torah envisioned the mitzvah. The reason why they were motivated to do that was because they were afraid that if you don't do it the way they prescribe it, the way they want you to do it, then something very bad is going to come out of that down the line. So they decided to, so to speak, straitjacket you and add a condition which the Torah didn't have. The Torah doesn't recognize that condition. Now, obviously, a good Jew, a God-fearing, observant Jew, would want to fulfill the Gzeira d'Rabbanan and live up to what the Rabbanan established. And by doing so, fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa the way the Rabbanan wants you to fulfill it. But he went ahead and he said, you know what? I'm going to do the mitzvah d'oraisa the way the Torah wants it, and I'll do the ma'aseh mitzvah. If the Rabbanan want to say, well, I shouldn't have done it that way, let him say it that way, but at least give me credit for the mitzvah d'oraisa. So here I want to mention two sugyas. One sugya is the opening sugya in Shas, Brachos Daf Beis. When is the end zone, the latest time for Kriyat Shema Shel Arvus? And the Mishnah records a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Gamliel. And the Chacham say ad chatzos. We'll give you up to midnight. And the Mishnah goes on to tell a story about the Talmidim. They were at a wedding and they couldn't say Kriyat Shema, and they came back and it was after chatzos. And I don't have the Gemara right here in front of me. I don't want to waste time. I think it's from Gamliel to check me out if you open up Brachas Daf Beis and Aleph. And he says to them, okay, you still chayav to read Kriyat Shema. And the Rishonim assume, not all Rishonim, but a very large representation of the Rishonim assume that according to Rabbanon, it's after Chatzos, you blew it, and therefore you don't have the opportunity of reciting Kriyat Shema.
Didn't Rabbi Gamaliel say that you had until Alalos HaShachar?
Correct. Oh, it was Rabbi
But
Gamliel. You looked it up. I wasn't sure if it was Rabbi Gamliel.
Conflict with the rabbis because he said that you could continue saying it under the obligation after Hatzos.
And therefore, he said to the Talmidim, if you came back after Chatzos, then Chayov Matem Likros. You'll take a look at the Mishnah. And the Rishonim say that the Rabbanan would say, no. You had to say Kriyat Shema before Chatzos. You didn't do so. And therefore, the mitzvah is gone. Again, Rabbos, I'm not telling you that all the Rishonim agree with that, but that's one school of thought in the Rishonim. So Kumtais, that according to that understanding of the Chachamim, the Rabbanan are saying that even though you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema min Torah after Chatzos, we're going to undermine that. And Rabbeinu Yonah, at the very beginning of Masechta Brachos, says that in the name of, actually it's the Talmidim of Rabbeinu Yonah, in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, that according to the Rabbanan, you will not fulfill the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema after Chatzos. And the reason why the Rabbanan said that even though the Torah allows you out of Mudashachar, is because the Rabbanan were afraid that if you delay after Chatzos, you'll fall asleep and you'll never say Kriyat Shema. So the Rabbanan were motivated by this Gzeira, and therefore they instituted a change in the mitzvah. And they established that the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema is not kol zman shatem shokfim, meaning up until Amud HaShachar, but rather up until Chatzos. Ad kedei kach, that according to Rabbeinu Yonah, you're not yotzei even min Torah. Are you listening, Rabbi Osai? This is an amazing Kiddush. Now let's fast forward from Brachos to Sukkah in a sugya on Daf Yud Beis, and the Gemara says that if you have your schach in chavilos, meaning they're tied up instead of being rolled flat on the top of your sukkah, that's possible. That sukkah is psula. And there was a girsa in the Gemara that said lechatchila, meaning lechatchila you shouldn't be sitting in such a sukkah that has these chaviles moros. But Tosus there on the top of Yud Beis Amud Beis, please look it up if you get a chance, says that the girsa is mistaken. And even b'di'eved, you're not yotze afilu min Torah. Meaning, if what you have is a sukkah with chaviles moros, don't even bother entering into the sukkah and eating there on sukkahs. Because even b'di'eved and even min Torah, you're not yotze. If I put that Tosfos together with those Rishonim like Rabbeinu Yonah in Brachos regarding Kriyas Ma'after Chatzos, I come to the conclusion that when the Rabbanan said, don't do the mitzvah in such and such a way, we're afraid that, it's called Gzeres Nesarim. I mean, again, you have to know the Sugis and Sukkah. I don't know it right now off the top of my head. Or if you don't read Kriyas Shema b'chol Chatzos, we're afraid that you won't read Kriyas Shema at all. And therefore, because of that Gzeira and that Siag, the Rabbanan instituted a limitation in the mitzvah, in which the Rabbanan is saying that the way you're doing this mitzvah is unacceptable, because we're afraid down the line. And since it's unacceptable for us, we are mafkia, we are completely undermining the kiyum mitzvah doraisa, even though what you did is a kiyum mitzvah doraisa. When you sat in that sukkah, the Torah recognizes the kashrus of that sukkah. And there are a number of different psulim d'Rabbanan in schach. There's a Tosas, by the way, in Sukkah on Daf Gimel, where somebody went ahead and fulfilled, trying to remember the details, but fulfilled the mitzvah the way that Beit Shammai wanted you to fulfill the mitzvah. And Beis Hillel said, no, even though we agree fundamentally to Beit Shammai on a Doraisa level, but we don't want it that way. And Tosas uses a language, if you did it like Beit Shammai, imkein lo kiyamta sa mitzvah miyomecha. You never fulfilled that mitzvah. Mashma, even on a Doraisa level, you haven't fulfilled it. So I want to read to you a few lines from the Pri Megadim. Have you heard of the Pri Megadim? I think I've mentioned the Pri Megadim in the past. He lived at the beginning of or let's say in the middle of the 1800s, let's say spanning from the beginning of the 1800s, maybe till something like 1830, 1840. And needless to say, he was an absolute genius. In learning, he was incredible. He was a prolific writer. He wrote many, many different svarim. There's some of his svarim that are still not even published. They're in manuscript form. What I have in front of me is what's called the Psicha HaKoleles le Orach Chaim. He has an introduction to Orach Chaim, to that chelik of Shulchan Aruch. He says the Reish Brachos at the beginning of Masechta Brachos, B'Rabbeinu Yonah, Amru Rabbanan Imkar Kriyat Shema Liachar Chatzos Lo Yotza Af Min HaTorah. And he says Nikot Klala. You should formulate a klal called Mili Derabanan Di Amru B'Mitzvah Satzei Shetzarach Lasos Kach. Anything where the Rabbanan limited the mitzvah shel Torah and said you have to do it this way, and he went ahead and he did it his own way, which on a deraisa level is fine. Af min haTorah lo yotza. We both say af min haTorah lo yotza. This was not our intuitive answer to the original question that we posed. Then listen to this. V'yotze lanu, now it's based on this klal that I am formulating. Hadinu kach, mishes palel tfilas arvis b'Shabbos, tiyotzi dechovas kiddush min haTorah. On a deraisa level, he has fulfilled the mitzvah of kiddush. K'moshe kosav Magid Avram b'siman reish ayin alf. I think we mentioned this Magid Avram dozens of times. That min haTorah you yotzi the mitzvah of kiddush in tefillah. Hoil v'chazal asmechu akra. Asmechu akra means an asmachta. Lekadish al kos yayin u'b'makom suda dafka. Im came, listen carefully, this is the punchline. Af min haTorah lo yotza. Do you hear what's going on over here? The man is saying that on a deraisa level he was yotze in tefillah, his mitzvah of kiddush, which would certainly reflect the sheet of the Rashba that we spoke about in the Tshuva, the Rashba, who says that yayin is only, takonis chachamim. But certainly likuva yayin is not likuva, and you were yotze the mitzvah of kiddush and tefillah. Says the Pri Megadim, you were not yotze the mitzvah of kiddush. Af min haTorah lo yotze. Now, at the face of it, the Rishonim never accepted this. They assumed that you could be yotze with tefillah, and the Magid Avram paskins like that la halacha. So, for example, according to the Rashba, according to the Magid Avram, if I daven Ma'ariv, I was yotze kiddush min haTorah, I'm only chayiv in kiddush min Rabbanan. A katan sheigia lechinuch could recite kiddush because he's chayiv min Rabbanan and I'm chayiv min Rabbanan. But if you look here in the Psicha Koleles of the Pri Megadim, he writes regarding someone who recited kiddush and tefillah. Af min haTorah lo yotzav him shama acher kach kiddush mikoton af al gav shegiel lechinuch lo yotzav. Pri Megadim says if I davened and now I want to have a cut and make kiddush for me, I'm not yotze because the cut is only chayiv d'Rabbanan. I'm chayiv d'oraisa. Why am I chayiv d'oraisa? because once the Rabbanan instituted Kiddush al Yayin b'makom Suda, if I recite Kiddush in Tefillah in this case, Shalo al Yayin Shalo b'makom Suda lo yotze yidei chovasa min Torah. Do you hear me, Rabbosai? Sometimes in Zoom it's very hard to project your voice. I'm pushing, screaming at the top of my lungs, but it doesn't seem to sink in. I don't see Bruce. Okay, he is having trouble with his camera. I don't see Bob. I don't know. Bobby is probably on the road somewhere. Spiegel, I don't know where he went. Okay, Joe, it's just you and me right now. Can you hear me, though? I don't mean hear me.
I hear you, and it's sinking in. I can hear you, even if you can't see me. I can hear you.
You remind me.
I can also take the bus and come over to Hard Knoth. It's not a problem.
Listen, Bruce, you remind me of a Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara says that the Sofer heard a voice that says, "Write a get to my wife." And the Gemara wants to know, where did that voice come from? Because he couldn't see who was speaking. The Baal was deep down in a bar, down in a cistern somewhere, subterranean. And the Gemara says, Dilma Shade. Maybe he heard the voice of a demon. And therefore he can't write the get for his husband. Anyway. So I'm assuming that the voice that I'm hearing, Bruce, is your voice. And here's the rub. How do we understand the Rashba and the Moed Avram and so forth? They hold that when the Rabbanan made a gzera, a siag, they're going to go all the way. They're not going to tolerate any violation of that siag. They're going to say, because of that siag, this is the sukkah that we recognize. Because of that siag, Kriyat Shema has to be recited before chatzos. And if you don't do it that way, then take the highway and you're not yotze from in Torah. But in the case of Kiddush, the requirement of Yayin and Makom Suda, which Rabbanan instituted, is not a gzera. It's not a siag. The Rabbanan want to enhance the mitzvah. They want to add something to the mitzvah. They don't want to subtract from the mitzvah d'oraisa. They don't want to cancel the mitzvah d'oraisa and rewrite the whole script. When there's a siag and a gzera involved, they don't want to tamper with this. They want to guarantee that gzera will be fulfilled. I would even go as far as saying that maybe if he blew the shofar on Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah or took the lulav on Shabbos of Sukkot, he's not Yotze. Because the Rabbanan are afraid, Shemi Avirenu Daled Amos, Gzera D'Rabba. And they will go ahead and say that we want this man mitzvah to be during the week and not on Shabbos. Because of this Gzera. You do it otherwise, well, guess what? You didn't do a mitzvah, even on a D'Oraisa level. And so too, if you go ahead and read Kriyat Shema after Chatzos, we're afraid that that'll undermine the whole Gzera that they instituted a siyah. And so too in Sukkah with regard to Psulei Sukkah. I'll give you another example. The Gemara tells us in Menachos on Daf Mem that you should not wear sadin b'tzitzis, meaning you don't put tzitzis of wool on a beged that's made of pishtan, of flax, a linen. Even though the Torah says that you're chayav to put tzitzis on a beged of linen, a beged shel pishtan, a sadin. The Rabbanan is saying, no, forget about that mitzvah. We're afraid that you wear that beged at night with the tzitzis, and it'll be kilayim, and you'll violate these kilayim. During the day, there's a mitzvah of tzitzis, and therefore, kilayim b'tzitzis is mutter, and you're obligated to put tzitzis on this beged of pishtan. But at night, you'll you'll violate kilayim. So they said, don't wear this beged with tzitzis. And if you went ahead and you put tzitzis on this beged, and you wore it on during the day, you're not yotze the mitzvah of tzitzis. D'Rabbanan mafkia, that which is a mitzvah sasei doraisa, because they're afraid that you might come to violate the Isur Kalayim. But not so in the case of Kiddush. With all due respect to the Pri Megadim. In the case of Kiddush, we're talking about how to fulfill the mitzvah. We want to enhance the mitzvah. The Rabbanan want to add another element to the mitzvah. As we sing here, Yoter Tov, Yoter Tov. But the Rabbanan do not want to undermine the mitzvah shel Torah. I think the Pri Megadim went very far. And he holds that if a person is going to disregard the rabbinic obligation of Kiddush, which means Kiddush al Yain Mokum Suda, then in effect he's like undermining the Rabbanan. He's disregarding the Rabbanan. He's saying, you know what, I'll do it my way. And even though the Torah, he has the Torah, supporting him the way he's doing it, but the Rabbanan are not happy with that. They don't want to tolerate a person who disregards their rabbinic envision of or structure of this mitzvah. So therefore, according to Pri Megadim, even when the Rabbanan changed the mitzvah d'oraisa, not as a gzera or a siag, that maybe you'll violate the Torah law, you'll wear tzitzis inside at night, or you'll come to sit in a sukkah that's not even kosher d'oraisa, so forth and so on. Even if it's not that, the Rabbanan will be mafkia the kiyum d'oraisa, because this is the way they want you to do the mitzvah. And if you say, no, I want to do it the way the Torah wants to do it, the Rabbanan are going to say, no, we're going to be mafkia your mitzvah. That's the Pri Megadim. And I had a shtickle raya to the Pri Megadim. And with this, we'll finish it up for today. I just wanted to bounce this off you. The Gemara talks about the mitzvah of b'sharbacha. And Beis Shammai say b'sharbacha means you have to recline when you recite Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis. Right? So b'sharbacha means b'shchiva. You're horizontal instead of vertical. And Beis Hillel disagree. And they say no, b'sharbacha means bizman shel shchiva. In other words, when people are usually asleep, but it has nothing to do with the posture of the body. The Gemara then goes on and says that if you did it like Beit Shammai, and when it came to Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis, you opened up your couch and you laid down on the couch in a position of shchiva in order to fulfill the mitzvah b'sharbacha the way Beit Shammai understood it, then you're not yotze the mitzvah. Now here, I don't think there's a gzera or a siyak. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think we're saying, well, if you're going to recline for Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis, then such and such a terrible thing is going to happen. But rather what's happening is he's questioning or disregarding or contradicting the authority of the Chachamim. The Chachamim say, with all due respect, that's not the way we're going to read Kriyat Shema. And the Pri Megadim understood that if you don't want to comply with the way the Rabbanan wants you to do the mitzvah, you want to do it in a different way, even though the Torah would allow you to do it in that way, and recognize your mitzvah, and check you off with a kiyum mitzvah, the Rabbanan are going to be mafkia your mitzvah. And therefore, if the Rabbanan tell you that we want you to recite Kiddush al Yayin b'makom Suda, You went ahead and you were Makayim Tefillah, Kiddush B'Tefillah Doraisa. The Rabbanan are going to say, no, 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 you're starting up with us, you're disregarding us, we're going to be Mafkia your Kiyum. We're going to nullify your Kiyum on Mitzvah Doraisa. That's, I think, the sheet of the Pri Megadim. The last question, which is not for today, is can we reconcile that with the Rajba and other Rishonim, who seem to assume that you can be Yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush Midoraisa even without Yain. And since this is the last shir that we have until after Pesach, I'll just stretch it for one more minute and I'll say the following. That what the Rishonim are saying here, and the Magen Avraham, is not necessarily against the Pri Megadim. What do I mean? The Pri Megadim says that the Rabbanan will exercise their authority to undermine and negate your Kiyum Mitzvah Doraisa because you are scoffing at the Chachamim. You're disregarding the way they required you to do the mitzvah. Therefore, we're going to nullify your mitzvah, even on the Doraisa level. But let's say a person is in a situation where he doesn't have the option of fulfilling the mitzvah the way the Rabbanan wanted it. He's anus. He's not disregarding the Rabbanan. He's just saying, look, Chotch, at least let me be Makayim the mitzvah the way the Torah orchestrated the mitzvah. In such a case, I suggest that even the Pri Megadim would agree that the Rabbanan would not be mafkia and nullify his mitzvah doraisa. Why? Because he's not disregarding the Chachamim. And I want to add one sentence, Joe, and then the floor is yours. I found the Orach Laner in Sukkah on Yud Beis asks the following question: what do you do if the only schach that you have is schach posel midrabanan, and you have no access to any other schach? Should you therefore not sit in the sukkah? Or should you use whatever schach that you could get a hold of, which is posel midrabanan, but at least it's kosher midaraisa, and at least fulfill the mitzvah min Torah? And what do you think he answers? Sit in the sukkah. Use schach that's posel derabanan. By the way, don't publicize this because I'll get into deep trouble. But the Aruch LaNer says, at least be Makayim the mitzvah doraisa. Again, is this against the Pri Megadim? No, it's not against the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim is saying the Rabbanan will exercise their authority and be mafkiyah mitzvah doraisa. Why? Because you're not interested in fulfilling the mitzvah the way the Rabbanan fashioned the mitzvah. But if you're honest and circumstances beyond your control, this is the only way that you could fulfill the mitzvah, then the Rabbanan are going to say, go ahead. Fulfill the mitzvah on a doraisa level. We will not undermine and negate your mitzvah because you're not doing it lahachis. You're not doing it b'mezid in order to undermine the Rabbanan and contradict the way they want you to do the mitzvah. You're doing it because you have no other choice. Joe?
So I was just going to go to it something to that level, which the Rav's been talking about, is that with regards to Shema, after if it's because
after Chatzos,
what?
After Chatzos, what are you talking about?
After Chatzos, with regards to Shema, after Chatzos,
yeah.
Because the time period that the Chachamim have given you let it pass. So maybe that's the issue. Can you bring that back to this situation? Like you're saying right now, it maybe the issue, the reason why they're so machmir is that you let it pass. You let the time when the Chachamim did. That's the reason why we're not allowing you to go farther. And
that's what I call, Joe, in my language, you disregarded the rabbinic requirement.
Right.
Could be that Rama Gamliel said, look, you were at a wedding.
But maybe if you were sleeping. I'm trying to remember the Gemara. I don't remember.
Okay, so I don't know about sleeping, but let's say you were dancing at a wedding. Yeah, I don't know how long it takes you to take a break to say Kriyas, but whatever. So you were being Mesameach the Chos and Kal. You aren't disregarding the Rabbanon. You took the last coach at midnight, like in Cinderella. And guess what? You got back and it was after Chatzos. Shemi Shamayim. What should we do?
Rely on Rabbi
Gamliel says,
Gamliel.
Rabbi Gamliel says, read Kriyat Shema. Why? Because you weren't disregarding the Rabbanon. You were busy with another mitzvah, a great mitzvah of being Mesameach the Chos Kala. What did the Rabbanon say? I don't know. The Rabbanon say maybe, before you went to the Chassan, you should, I don't know. That's a loose end in this whole thing. So look, Rabbos, I hope you enjoyed the Shia today because I think we're beginning to see that Kiddush is a very complicated business. I've already
just starting.
I've written 110 pages, maybe 120 pages in a Word document. These are just a few pages that I have in front of me on Kiddush. I'll tell you another story. One of my neighbors in Ramat Beit Shemesh is a Sfaradi, and I told him I was writing a sefer. Does he know of any rabbis from the Sephardic community who would write me what's called a haskama? He says to me, I'll take care of it. A month later, listen to this, I get a gorgeous letter sent to me by email from Rabbi David Yosef. Do you know who that is? He's the Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel. A beautiful haskama, but listen to this. You didn't get to the punchline yet. With 4 pages of written ha'oras on what he saw in my thing. I didn't even have the time yet to go through it. So this is as of a week ago. Yesterday, Rav Amar sends me a letter from Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. That's Rabbi David Yosef's brother, who was chief rabbi until he passed the baton. 9 pages of ha'oras. I can write a book. I can publish a book just from these 2 letters of recommendation, if you call it that. So I just had the story. I haven't had time to go through all this because, I give Daf Yomi. It takes me half a day on Daf Yomi. I also give our shir. I give 2 shiurim in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And I'm trying to find time to write this book and finish with it so I could go on to the next book. But I can tell you this. I could probably publish a book just on what I got from 2 brothers. The last name is Yosef. I'm just lucky that Ovadia is not alive. Because if he was alive, he'd write me 1,000 pages of ours. Anyway, that's the story I wanted to tell you. It's an interesting.
So why not next week?
Exactly.
What
It's
for
great.
us?
It's wonderful.
Yeah, I have to. I mean, you have to understand, Rabosai. I'm just going to shut this off for a second.